Hello and welcome back to Beyond the To-Do List, a podcast about productivity. I'm your host, Eric Fisher, and I'm excited to share with you this conversation I had with Elizabeth Lotardo. She's a leadership expert and the author of Leading Yourself. Find more joy, meaning, and opportunities in the job you already have. In this conversation, we're talking all about how to find purpose and fulfillment in your current job, even when your circumstances aren't perfect. We're talking about the power of mindset, how to reframe your beliefs to create more joy at work, how to focus on small moments of impact that can provide a sense of purpose. Elizabeth also shares why the quiet quitting trend is more about self-protection than disengagement, how to handle those inevitable workplace changes, and how to set goals to help you take control of your career. So, if you're looking for practical strategies to bring more meaning and energy to your work, this conversation with Elizabeth Lotardo is right for you. Well, it is my privilege to welcome to the show Elizabeth Lotardo. Elizabeth, welcome to Beyond the To-Do List.
Thanks for having me.
I'm excited to talk about this because your new book, Leading Yourself, Finding More Joy, Meaning, and Opportunities in the Job You Already Have, is amazing. And by the way, this subtitle, is that what they call it? A subtitle? I don't know. There's a parentheses. It's like, so then that's the title. And then it says parentheses, despite imperfect bosses, weird economies, lethargic coworkers, annoying systems, and too many deliverables. I think we can all relate to all of those things.
The research would certainly suggest them. I did not pull it out of thin air. Those things are ever present in almost every workplace.
Talk about keyword stuffing the title, too, in a good way.
I didn't realize that was going to be a benefit when I did it, but it definitely has been.
Yeah. So you say, I mean, again, here's the key. The key, I kind of emphasized it when I read it, is in the job you already have. And a lot of people, especially right now, are looking for new positions and new jobs. However, that doesn't mean that you can't you can not just make the most of what you already have, but even thrive is what I think you would say. And you can find purpose in your current, air quotes, normal job.
Absolutely. I wanted to write a book about normal jobs because I feel like there are so many books for people who work at Google or are the CEO of a startup. And the vast majority of us have zero direct reports. We work in a normal, typical corporate job that isn't all that inspiring. Yet we have this human drive for purpose, for opportunities, for connection. So how can we fulfill that inside of these pretty average circumstances?
Yeah. And you even kind of refer to this as the starting point here as managing the space between your ears, that it has a lot to do with your perspective and how you define satisfaction and how you see the task list or the job description versus what it really is. I mean, I've been there. A lot of people have been there. You even talk about how, a lot of us, we get excited when we find our first job and then kind of feel disillusioned months, even years later, if we're still in that and have kind of micro promoted within or whatever. So how do you define purpose at work? Let's start there so that, we can kind of get a common ground playing field with us here and as well as the listeners.
So to me, the way we talk about purpose is the bedrock for so much of corporate angst and why people are seeking new opportunities. Purpose really came into the fore in 2020 when the workforce was put into self-reflection mode. We all went home, we were by ourselves, we had these existential crises that typically only happen to a small percentage of people at a time on a global scale. And everyone who was working was wondering, what am I doing with my time? Does my work matter? I'm not sure my life is meaningful anymore. This sort of emo kid crisis throughout the workforce as we all sat at home on our laptops. And that gave rise to the purpose movement, the seeming answer to this need to feel impactful. But to me, the way purpose is talked about is setting us up for disappointments. It's talked about as this giant, noble mission, feed the poor, this philanthropic thing. Or it's talked about as I mispronounce it every time, the ikigai, where all those circles of what you're good at combined with what you love, combined with what the world needs, combined with what you get paid for. And it looks so deeply profound. And the majority of us are not going to have that experience. no one's ikigai or however you pronounce it presents as like data analyst or entry level accountant, right? We set ourselves up for failure when we look at purpose as this giant thing. And the path I suggest in leading yourself is to find small moments of purpose and impact inside your normal job and let those fill your cup over time and create this sense of meaning and impact instead of seeking this perfect confluence of circles in some impossible dream job scenario.
Yeah. And I think to me, this finally started to click when I didn't attach myself so much to a title, so much as, like you mentioned, one of the ones you just mentioned, entry-level accountant or data analyst or whatever. Not to say that those positions can't have meaning. In fact, they can. But if you're looking to be, data and, specific data analyst, whatever job title, and that's the goal, that's one thing. But to be engaged in a position, to be truly living into or experiencing, the key for that title would be, what if you like data? What if that turns you on? What if you're excited and enjoy data and you're engaged with data, and that's the thing? And so it's more about your skills and your skill set. And that's scary too, because sometimes it's like, that's a whole other world of self-doubt where it's like, am I really good at this? Do I really enjoy this? Especially if it's the thing I do as a air quote job. Sometimes, some people would say, oh man, if you could just be a podcaster all day. Well, if that's the only thing you're doing, then you got to tread lightly, because there's a whole other aspect to it in terms of making it something that is a career.
It can quickly send you into an existential crisis contemplating questions like these. So I want to approach them in a softer way. Let's use our entry-level accountant example. You mentioned that job can be very purpose-driven. Absolutely, it can. Entry-level accountants keep people out of jail. They make sure payroll gets paid. They make sure that the expenses of the business are set up in a way that enables the business to grow instead of collapse. These roles are hugely meaningful. The challenge is we look at them, to your point, from the title, say like, oh, that doesn't really, sound all that exciting. Or we look at them from the to-do list and all of these disjointed action items. And both of those lenses remove us from the ripple effect this work actually has. And we know that when we tap into our ripple effect, when we see where our emails go, what decisions are made as the result of the data we're pulling, who is impacted, real people, by the work we're doing on a daily basis, that's what starts to fill our purpose cup. It's not some magical title or even the perfect job. It is the through line to knowing that these things on our punch list, they matter to somebody.
Yeah, it's that impact that we have. And in a way, that's how we create the meaning versus find the meaning, as you suggest we should go about doing.
Absolutely. And we see some interesting data from the Great Resignation. I mentioned 2020 was sort of the real peak of the purpose movement. The Great Resignation, this big talent shift in 2020 to 2021, was a fascinating thing to witness as an organizational psychologist, watching the majority of people leave their job in pursuit of a more meaningful career was a shift that we have never seen before, a scale that we had never seen before. But what we found is that 2 years later, there was a big study done by Harvard on this. The majority of people who left their position during the Great Resignation reported 2 years later that they were better off at their old job and that they left their job too quickly. So what does that tell us? This drastic, I'm going to pick up all my stuff and go find my purpose approach, it doesn't work. What does work is to create it. And no job is perfect, but most jobs do have an impact when you look for it.
And that's not to say that we don't find ourselves in career positions that have incurable, and again, this is up to you to decipher in your place and time that you're at, but there are some, hey, the culture is not going to change. That manager is not going to change. They're not going to promote me. We've all come up against those, but we question whether or not it's something that can be fixed or not. You also talk about it as, we filter our beliefs, that the reality of the position may not be true. In other words, I think this is one of the things that you were getting at here with the 2020 is everybody had this kind of pause moment and the questions couldn't be ignored. It was, what is the reality of where I'm at right now and where the world is right now and the company is right now?
Absolutely. And to reckon with that is a scary thing on a global scale. And to me, what sits beneath it, and to your point of we're all informed by our own beliefs, is a couple of things. First, nobody's posting their existential crisis on LinkedIn, right? We're all talking about how meaningful and joyful and honored we are to be at our jobs. The increase in hyperbolic language on social media is astounding, and it makes all of us feel like crap about our real lives. Secondly, this notion of I have a category chart in the book that is differentiating between imperfect and like kind of annoying behaviors in a workplace versus garbage behaviors, like pretty bad, especially at scale, and abusive behaviors. And we don't have a lot of data on where the nuance lies. And we only evaluate things through our own experiences, which are biased. If you worked for a completely toxic jerk before you landed in your job that's pretty meh, you're going to feel differently than a person who worked for a great leader who landed in a job that's pretty meh. So it's important to know, what is my backstory that I'm bringing into this, and how is that coloring the way I'm evaluating this current opportunity?
Yeah. And even in the book, you say something along the lines of that if you're looking for evidence that your job is miserable, you're going to find it. And you talk about the Bader-Meinhof phenomenon and how people use that like mental trickery to basically, they see one thing, and then like when you see a car and then you see it everywhere, you buy a new car and then you see that car everywhere after you buy it.
Yeah, our brain plays all these super annoying tricks on us that unfortunately contribute to a lot of workplace dissatisfaction. So to your point, if you buy this car, you're going to see it everywhere you go. If you go into work thinking my boss is a jerk and they're only out to get me and I hate them, your brain will prove you right. We don't want to be wrong as humans. Your brain will say, see, they put a typo in the email, and last week they were mad at you for putting a typo in an email. How unfair is that? And they'll ignore the time your boss said good morning, the time your boss said, oh, I think you did a great job on this, right? All those things get pushed to the side in favor of what proves our assumption right. So back to being aware of the assumptions we're bringing, the beliefs we're looking to confirm at work. That's where, we have to look inward and see, what part are we playing in creating this miserable work experience? Are we looking for things to be bad and unfortunate and unfair? Because if we are, that's certainly what we're going to find.
What are some of the practical ways that we can shift that mindset when we feel we're slipping into, either by our own doing or agreeing with others who are doing it, slipping into that negative, seeing only the negative aspects of our job?
So I'll explain it in a way that one of my friends who's a therapist talks about it. And this really made sense to me visually. If you imagine these sort of negative, yucky beliefs that we get pulled into, like a wheelbarrow rut, like you're pushing a wheelbarrow through the dirt. Every time you push that wheelbarrow through the rut gets deeper. And over time, it's almost like the rut, the groove in the soil, is pulling your wheelbarrow into it. It's so deep, it's almost impossible to get out of. And if you don't realize the rut is there, you think nothing is wrong. So there's a first step here of self-awareness, but where the magic really starts to happen is reframing the thought pattern. And the best way to do this is using a brain hack called This Is My Chance. And I learned this from a motherhood mindset coach. Her name's Tessa Romero. But I've taken it into my workplace practice with her credit because it's so powerful. And the way you do it is you use This Is My Chance to reframe an annoyance, a frustration, a change into an opportunity. So let's say your boss throws another project on you at the last minute, right? Our wheelbarrow rut is like, how annoying. They have no idea how much I have to do, how inconsiderate. They could have done this themselves, given it to someone else. Repeating that mental thought track costs your boss nothing, but it costs you so much because now you're miserable. So how do you get out of it using This Is My Chance? that project gets lobbed your way. This is my chance to better prioritize. This is my chance to have a tough conversation with my boss about workload. This is my chance to lean on my colleagues and see how they can support me. This is my chance to push back and practice setting boundaries, forcing your brain to find an opportunity inside of a frustrating wheelbarrow rut situation is the only way out. And when you do that, you're not refusing the reality. You're not saying, this is great. I love this project. Perfect for me. That's still present, but you are forcing your brain to latch onto something. And that does so much for you neurologically and emotionally.
Well, and that works into the vision of the wheelbarrow stuck in the mud. It makes me think of when you talk about quiet fear, that fear often doesn't show itself as panicked activity, flurry of activity, although it can. It also can show up as hesitation, like stuck in the mud, literally, metaphorically, literally. And that one of the ways out of that is overcoming those insecurities, like you're talking about, noticing that this is a moment and having those be moments of self-advocacy.
Absolutely. None of us are in 100% control of our work experience. Even if you're the CEO, you have your board breathing down your neck, a big group of angry shareholders. There are tons of things outside of everybody's control, but we always control our response and how we show up, the emotions we feed into, and what we do in the face of these things. And that can be defeating because you're recognizing so much is out of your control, or empowering because you're giving yourself permission to operate in the face of it. And when it comes to quieting fear, for me, it never really showed up as this like big ball of anxiousness and heightened activity. It shows up as playing small and not stepping up and not saying the hard thing and choosing to take the safe route instead of the route I know is best for myself or best for the organization. So what I wanted to address in leading yourself is, how do you overcome fear, not in a way that makes you, make stupid decisions, which is often what we think about when we overcome fear. Fear is designed to keep you safe, but how can you overcome some of these less than helpful things that are holding you back? How can you accurately articulate the upside that our stupid lizard brain likes to ignore? And how can you do it in a way that makes you feel more fulfilled and opens doors for you instead of just this like blind, fearless, I'll do whatever I want person?
Yeah, I was going to say, how do we build confidence? One is noticing the opportunity in the moment, and that can sometimes, again, if we're on autopilot or if we're playing small and we're just kind of passively, this is where the quiet quitting, I hated that phrase. I still do, but the whole quiet quitting thing is like, okay, nothing's going to change, so I'm just going to do my bare minimum. And there are lots of reasons people do that, but noticing the moment, as well as then using that to build confidence or build the confidence ahead of time so that when a moment arises, you can advocate for yourself at work without feeling like you're being pushy or entitled.
And we often overestimate the significance of these moments to the people in charge, right? We lay awake at night thinking, oh, I'm going to say the hard thing in the meeting, and then the CEO forgets like 2 minutes later. So the first is recognizing that it is a human phenomenon. We overestimate our own importance. To me, one of the most helpful hacks in managing fear and anxiety at work is to force myself to articulate the upside. Our brains naturally latch on to the risk, right? Say you have an idea you want to present in the big meeting. Your brain is going to, without any prompting from you, say, well, look stupid. What if they hate it? What if there's this giant flaw in my idea that I don't see, right? All these spinning wheels of it's going to turn out terrible. Just don't do it. You don't have to ask your brain to do that. It is an evolutionary function. It will do it for you. What we know helps with workplace satisfaction, engagement, finding meaning at work is to force your brain to articulate the potential upside. You don't have to do it. You're just giving the potential upside a seat at the table of decision making. So if we go back to presenting an idea in the big meeting, what is the potential upside? Maybe they love it. Maybe they think completely different of you and they see your strategic thinking, your creativity. What if your boss is so relieved that you finally brought that to the table so they didn't have to? What if your colleagues build on the idea and make it even better and it has a big impact? What if it is taking center stage at your next performance review as your biggest win of the year? What if? And again, that doesn't mean you have to like blindly make the decision, but giving yourself permission to at least acknowledge and explore a potential upside can help you feel not only more confident in the face of making a decision because you're not making a fear-based one, you actually make better decisions because instead of latching on to one side of this upside downside equation, you are objectively weighing it.
Well, and one of the things that has to do with change in a position that you feel hasn't happened or is long overdue, and you're kind of biding your time either to exit or biding your time to step in and advocate. But that's not how change always happens. Often, in fact, it's where change happens to you or around you. Yeah. And it's this uncertainty of, oh no, suddenly everything has changed at my job and it wasn't my choice, it was somebody else's. Instead of advocating for it, we're resisting it. We're on the defense, in other words. How do you navigate that kind of change?
It's a frustrating dynamic to be in, and it happens to everybody at some point where some change is thrust upon you by people who obviously don't understand your role, lack the context that you do, and aren't going to have to execute. And it feels terrible. So the first step is to recognize this is a universal qualm. It's not because you did anything wrong. It's not because your organization is a terrible place to be. It just happens. It's part of scale and working with other humans. But how do you operate in the face of it? First, recognize you control your response. And if this change is mandated at a really high level and it's hugely significant and probably irreversible, being bitter and resentful only costs you. We all remember the people who dug their heels into the sand, who said this was terrible, and then it went forth anyway, and the organization either drug them along begrudgingly or fired them. The way we respond to these things has a big impact on how we are perceived. And that's not some like puppeteering mind game, fake it. If you have legitimate concerns, that's valid. But a giant rarely serves you inside of your organization. It is on you to put that inward, take it home, go on a run, scream in the shower, whatever you need to do, and then come back in a way that shows, hey, I'm a team player. I'm raising these concerns because I want the best for our team and for our organization. And in the event this decision, this change is moving forward as planned, I'm fully on board. It is possible to express both disagreement and commitment. In fact, it's a core principle of Amazon leadership. And I think we often fall into this false dichotomy of we have to 100% support the decision or completely disagree with it. And the suggestion for leading yourself is that space in the middle of, hey, here's my thoughts. I want what's best for the organization. These are the challenges I see. In the event this decision is case closed, I'm fully committed to moving forward. And the reality that comes doesn't change, but your reputation certainly does.
Yeah. It all has to do with that perspective, I think, right? Is what you're saying. I think that you even refer to it in the book as something along the lines of controlling what you can, influencing what you can't, and then the rest you just let go of.
Which is defeating or empowering, depending on how you look at it. But I've certainly, at many junctures in my career, taken decisions home and stewed about them all night and vented too much to my friends and family who humored me because they like me, but I'm sure were not pleased to hear the, eighth point of why the reorg was a bad idea. We pay a steep price personally for over-attaching to some of these things that are maybe decisions without context, are maybe decisions that are right for the organization as a whole, but make our part more challenging, decisions that are maybe somewhere in between. Most decisions aren't either right or wrong. They're some version of the middle. And the ability to move forward in the face of something you're not 100% on board with is a benefit to yourself before your organization.
Yeah. One of the other things you talk about in the book is goals. And I see this kind of workplace change, especially when it's not something you've advocated for, although it also goes with you advocating for yourself. your goals at work can feel like they're interrupted when change happens without it being something you've chosen. It feels a little more aligned when it's something that you've advocated for yourself. I've made my 5-year plan. I'm going to get to this position, and again, that's way more focused on, I'm speaking from personal experience. I want to get to this level title and this position because that's what's currently in front of me, and I'm not looking around me at other options. How do goals tie into all of this change?
Goals sound like a really exhausting topic in the face of a lot of change. Everyone, at least for me, is like, oh, my goal is to, survive today. That's my goal. But we know that when we are too focused on short-term goals, we don't have that long-term trajectory, we cost ourselves a lot. So when we think about goal setting in the face of rapid change, in the face of not owning 100% of decisions, and in the face of careers are becoming windier, right? This linear path is not happening for most people, for better or worse. It becomes more challenging to set goals. And the suggestion I make in leading yourself is to reckon with this, focus on input goals instead of outcome goals. Instead of, I want to reach this specific title by 5 years, that's an outcome, right? So much goes into that. If your industry collapses, you could have done everything right and it's not going to happen. If your boss is guilty of money laundering, you could have done everything right and it's not going to happen. There's so many variables. But when you focus on what's in your control, the emphasis on all these other factors, macro, micro, our organization, our boss, they start to take less importance. So what is within your control if you want to hit a certain title in 5 years? You're going to make sure you're crushing your deliverables. You're going to be building relationships with people beyond your boss, beyond your team, beyond your organization. You are going to be diligent about tracking your wins, measuring progress, keeping a pulse on the metrics that are most important to your role. All of those things are 100% within your control. They're going to drastically increase the likelihood of you hitting that output of reaching a specific title in 5 years. But if you don't hit the specific title in 5 years, you can hang your hat on you did your best instead of hoping that the stars align and they didn't.
One of the things that I really like when you're talking about goals in the book is the idea that motivation is unreliable, and we can all attest to that. Yes. But you say that systems are key. How would you tie in what you were just talking about with all those different processes into putting into place those simple systems that people can implement to maintain momentum at work, even though it is unreliable?
We cannot rely on our own motivation, especially now. If you happen to glance at the news, I think you posted a graphic about this on LinkedIn, actually. If you look at the news, the first thing in the morning, your productivity, your motivation just explodes like a balloon. There's no more, you've popped it with this bubble of reality or this needle of reality. So that's where systems come in, making sure that our environment, our support is optimized to propel our goals, even when we're not personally feeling it. And breaking it down into behavior is one thing. So let's go back to the goal of I want to get to the specific title in 5 years. We know that my ability to track my wins is instrumental in possibly reaching that goal, hopefully reaching that goal. A system to put in place to track your wins is, level 1 is a calendar reminder. I would say level 2 is an accountability partner inside your organization or outside of your organization where you're meeting on a monthly basis to report out your wins. And a level even further than that is, I saw this app, I forget the name of it, but if you Google it, you'll find it, where you upload an embarrassing picture of yourself. And if you don't do the thing that you said you were going to do, the app sends it to your entire contact list. So depending on your level of seriousness with this, there's a huge spectrum of what you can do. But in all of those examples of a calendar reminder, of an accountability partner, of some giant threat that forces you to do the thing, the onus is on this external prompting event instead of your internal desire. And when we break our goals down to behavior and we put these external systems around them, we increase the likelihood that we do get to that 5-year title increase. And in the event that we don't, we still did a lot of things that will help us in the long run, instead of it didn't happen for me because, my boss was money laundering and now my reputation is ruined. Well,
one of the other things that I think of when it comes to momentum And again, momentum and motivation sound like very similar words, but in fact, like you're saying, these systems are what give us continued momentum when our motivation is lacking. One of the other things that kind of plays into that, though, and you talk about this, is the factor of energy as well. Well, if we always have energy, then that's great. We can continually maintain momentum. But again, that's something that isn't always there as well. You got to create it. You've got to protect it. You've got to find out what is going to give it to you, especially when it comes to energy in the workplace.
Right, which is often a draining experience. So I'll share some advice with you that I read. I was reading an interview with Meryl Streep and someone who's a great actress. She was in The Devil Wears Prada, amongst many other quality films. Someone was interviewing her about how she's able to take on these various roles so deeply and adopt to this huge variety of accents, of mannerisms, of ages. And they said, where do you start when you get a new role? Do you start with the lines? Do you start with the accent? Do you start with the mannerisms? Is it the look? And she said, I always start where it feels fun. And that's something I learned from my husband, who is now her ex-husband, by the way, who's a sculptor. He said, you start where it feels fun. You got a big, hairy project. You start with where it feels like it's good to start, which seems like such an elementary way to approach productivity. But the science backs it up. And to the point of momentum, we know that starting with what seems like the easiest, the most fun, the most interesting part, that energy carries. Instead of fighting uphill, you have the wind at your back in terms of free thinking. The dopamine is flowing. Your brain is more awake than if you started like the most gritty, challenging, stupid thing first. So when we think about managing our own energy, starting where it feels fun is valid. The level of freedom isn't always there, right? Sometimes you have to do the boring thing first because someone else said so. But tapping into, hey, what element of this thing is going to be the easiest for me, the best for me, the most enjoyable for me, that is powerful in the way we experience our energy and in the level of productivity we're able to create in our job.
Yeah, I was going to say it's not always fun, but sometimes, if especially with experience, you can figure out what's the easy part, especially when it's a new project, or it's a duplicate project, but it's something new. Anyway, point I'm getting at is once in a while, stuff comes along and you're like, okay, I've got to do that thing, this big amorphous blob of, it's air quotes project. And you don't know how long it's going to take. You don't know how long even some of the broken down, we always suggest break things down, but we don't even know what those broken down pieces, once we've identified them, how long those are going to take. In fact, I was trying to do something last night. I should probably not share this story, but I'm going to do it anyway. I was going through this application process for something I wanted to do, and it's all online and it's very systematic and regimented. And I'm thinking, at first glance, you're like, user interface. Okay, there's 5 things here. Great. I know how long number 1 took. I click into number 2 and I'm like, oh, this doesn't, I have to watch this video and then answer a few questions. And the video doesn't have any kind of scrolling bar telling me how long I'm going to be watching for.
No.
And I'm going nuts because I'm like, how much longer is this video? Right. And you just,
Is
anyway.
this some type of psychological test? Like, I can't imagine
It might be.
knowing how much time is left.
Yeah, it might be. But I finished that. Then I finished the questions and I'm like, okay, great. I'm on number 3. I now kind of have a basis for where I'm at in this process. And yet then with number 3, there were like 4 videos instead of 1. And I'm like, and now I'm like, okay, I've kind of dug in. I was going to try and get this done before a certain point in time tonight and then shut it off. So I said, I'm cutting my loss. I'm going to stop right now. I'll pick it back up in the morning and I'll just plow through then when I have more energy. All that to say, this is a bad example of picking the easy thing because there was no way to do that. But what I did realize was I had to stop and pick it up later. My whole intention of getting something done. In other words, we don't always know what it is we're getting ourselves into. So you always want to look and say, okay, what is the first, quickest, easiest thing that I can do that makes it to where I'm not starting from nothing with a new task or a new project?
The starting from nothing, if you can get 1% of something done, the way our brain approaches having to do 99% of the thing versus 100% of the thing is so drastically different. And to your point, managing your energy isn't always starting with the fun thing. It's knowing that I'm going to plow through a little bit of this and then the rest is going to come easier to me. And what I love about that example, and I can't get over the fact that there's no timer on a video that's playing. That's like the ADHD in me could never. Our brain paces itself and it knows how much is left in whatever it is. Like if you're really hungry and you know lunch is coming at 12, your brain files that away. And at 12:05, you are ravenous. At 11:55, you are okay because lunch is in 5 minutes. But in your mind, you had lunches at 12 and now 12 o'clock has passed and your brain has paced itself for 12. And when you get beyond that, it's really hard. And that's what happens in corporate America. We pace ourselves to get to the finish line with no buffer of energy, of time, of motivation. And then something changes and we've got nothing left in the tank because we paced ourselves only enough to get to the finish. And to your point in your example, pacing yourself and then when the finish line changes, failing to recognize that, hey, finish line's changed, my energy is out, I'm tapping out, I'm going to reapproach in the morning is so important because had you pushed through and done questions or whatever it was 3, 4, 5, you probably wouldn't have done them well because your brain had paced itself to, I'm going to be done at this point.
One of the things that it really kind of reminded me of is as much as you can study and as much as you can learn these principles and know, okay, start with the fun thing or start with the easy thing to gain momentum and then you're not starting from 0%. Life is like that. At work or otherwise, we don't know what percentage it is that we're waiting for. There is no progress monitor that scrolls at the bottom of something we're waiting for in real life sometimes. And I kept thinking that I'm like, this is like the DMV. I have no idea how long it's going to take me to sit here for them to go cycle through the 7 to 10 people that are in front of me in line. So, you know what? Maybe this isn't the right time for me to be sitting here. I have to make a call and move on to something else.
I love that you brought this example up. And what I hope listeners are seeing is that you host a podcast on productivity and energy. I wrote a book on leading yourself, and both of us still struggle with this. It is an ongoing study and an ongoing practice. And the ability to manage your own energy is something that is never complete. You don't check the box on, I am now master of my own energy. You make incremental gains and you learn a little bit that over time improves things, but it's never finished and it's never perfect.
Yes. And when we come up against enough of these things, especially in the workplace, this is where, and we'll go back to the phrase I don't like, but I'm going to say it again. It's the quiet quitting thing, where when we've been depleted from motivation and we have a lack of systems, either by our making or someone else's, and we also have a lack of energy, this is where we get to that point where we're deciding, you know what, I'm just going to show up. And not in a show up and I'm here, I'm present, but in a I'm filling a spot kind of a way, a phoning it in way.
I too don't love the quiet quitting term, but the phenomenon of it is deeply saddening to me because what I see beneath it is not necessarily what shows up on the surface, which is resentment and I'm just going to collect a paycheck and all the ways HR talks about so terrible. To me, what's beneath the surface is a self-protection mechanism and survival. And people who have been so burned emotionally by a bad boss, by a bad workplace, by unrelenting change, by feeling like there's nothing they can control. It's that fight, flight, or freeze response. And the way it shows up in employee engagement is freeze. It's quiet quitting. It's saying, I can't afford to emotionally invest in this anymore. So to protect myself, I'm just going to put this wall up. And it's devastating. We know there's organizational consequences, but to suggest that you can quiet quit your job and be this fulfilled, happy, engaged person outside of work is an impossibility. That feeling leaks. And when you put up this quiet quitting, I'm emotionally checked out for 40 hours a week, you can't put a guardrail around it. So if you're there, you need to find a way out because you're the one paying the price, whether that is re-looking at your work experience and choosing to engage in some small ways that are meaningful, or finding a new play. Thinking that you're going to show up and quiet quit and you'll stick it to the man of your employer. You're sticking it to yourself.
Yeah. And I've had that experience as well. I mean, there was a time where I was overachieving a certain standard. It was, I won't go into it, but basically there was a ranking that came out as far as, how many people, it was an admissions thing. And I was enrolling more students. I mean, it was the end of the fiscal year and I happened to see it. I think somebody either by mistake or otherwise sent out the ranking, and it didn't just give 1 through whatever. It gave the numbers, and I was at the top, and it wasn't that hard. But then I saw everybody else's numbers on down the way and realized they were getting paid the same as me. And that was incredibly demotivating. And so I just said, well, how can I continue to do this position? Because I need it and I wanted it. And this was years and years and years ago. How can I still show up, but how can I conserve my energy? Because clearly there are other people here who aren't doing nearly as much, and it's okay. And again, it was probably not a great pattern, but I then started applying productivity hacks, and I was doing batch processing, and I was doing mail merge stuff, and I was doing checklists and all these kinds of things. And then I got into a habit of, I'm done for the morning at 9:30, 10 a.m. Let's just coast to lunch, and then the same thing repeated over into the afternoon. And I was playing some video games and stuff. I had positioned my computer, picked a cubicle where I knew when everybody was coming. I am proud and not proud at the same time of this.
It is both a flex and a point of embarrassment.
Exactly. There was a lot of wasted time, and yet I'm proud that I was able to figure that out and still break records and things. So it's one of those things where, again, I could have been sitting in a meeting and they could have been, as you say in the book, and we hear in the corporate world, give 110%. Well, you can't. One, that's just logically impossible. You can't give more than 100% of something. But you challenge that idea, saying we shouldn't be giving 110% to everything. So how, as professionals, can we strategically conserve our energy but not appear to be disengaged or stay fully engaged on what we need to?
I like your very corporate wording on that. I use the term phone it in the book, which is how can you be intentional with your effort and choose low impact areas in your job or in your life where you're going to phone it in. And the reason I called this out in the book, Leading Yourself, is my audience, and I would suggest yours, like people listening to a productivity podcast, are innate high performers. They want to excel. They want to be that person at the top of the rankings when the rankings mysteriously get revealed. And what we see in the long term is when that internal drive is left unchecked, it is more ripe for burnout. And the suggestion to phone it in is not saying you shouldn't care. It's saying you should care more selectively. And when you look at your job, there are elements that are not as important as others. When you look at your life, there are elements that are not as important as others. And being able to differentiate between those high impact things, the things that fill your energy, the things your boss really cares about versus, I could use ChatGPT to write up a summary of that meeting. I don't have to call through all the notes. That is an innate skill, because what it does is it opens your mental space for more creative thinking, more innovation, more engagement. It also opens opportunities for you because you have white space. When there is an initiative that you want to be a part of, you got time in your calendar to raise your hand. When there's a sick kid, you got to leave work a little bit early, there's some space in the calendar to do some shuffling. We need that buffer. And high performers often mistake that buffer as, I'm not doing enough, I could be doing more. But safeguarding it and preserving it and making sure that we are phoning it in on these not strategic elements is vital to long-term motivation, long-term success, and again, opening doors for opportunities.
Yeah. I think one of the things that can be a struggle, though, with that is it's not always our say as to what is or isn't and this leads into the whole boss management, working with other people aspect of it. We have a certain amount of agency, and it is definitely up to us to figure out how much do we already have, and what's our again, going back to how do we see it, what versus what's the actual reality of it, and then how can we exercise more of it. But then the human element complicates things as well.
Yeah, this is all fine and dandy to talk about on a podcast until your boss is like, no, everything is a high priority. It all matters. Everything requires full attention. I read 2 books last month that were both really good and had a shocking amount of overlap. I read Managing Up by Melody Wilding, which is a great book. I also read How to Talk So Kids Will Listen, which is a book from the 90s that I'm hoping helps me in toddler parenting. And when I tell you, the Venn diagram on these 2 books, near circle, like sub out toddler for boss. And what I came to realize, and something that I'd kind of thought for a long time prior to reading these 2 books, is that people are people, and we have this innate desire to be validated and told yes, and told that the thing we care about is going to happen and it's going to be okay. Your boss has that desire, so does your toddler. You approach it in different ways, though. So when we think about prioritization and your boss or someone else of authority saying everything is important, everything matters, you have to do everything 110%, saying, no, I don't, I have to pick and choose, is not going to work in the long term.
That sounds like the dealing with parenting book, dealing with a toddler right there.
That's why I said there's a lot of overlap in Managing Up and toddler parenting. I read both books at the same time, and I was like, I feel like I could have probably only read one of these. But leaning into that, saying, yes, I agree. Everything is really important. I see why all of these things are a priority, right? We're going to take that fear down. We're going to put ourselves on the same page with the boss. When it comes to prioritization, not saying you're not going to do this other thing, which do you think is most important? And then stop talking. Give the other person who is dictating to you all these things that you have to do the power, in some cases, to rank them and to choose. Even if they don't want to, they will. And when you sync up on that and they feel that you hear them, you know all these things are a priority, and you're starting on this one first, they're less likely to micromanage you and bother you. But the temptation is to be like, no, I have boundaries and I'm not going to give 110%. And you can't talk to me like that. And it just makes everything worse. You certainly don't want to take abuse, but the more you can validate the intent behind all of these things, the more you can confirm that you see the value, you know they're important, and the more you can force the other person to rank them, the better off the relationship will be in the long run.
Yeah. And it's also a good skill to practice, because often I think some of our listeners find that, oh, wait, I'm that boss, and I am that boss to me. Like, I am a small team, or I am a department of one, so it's still up to me. And it comes down to, okay, well, then I still have to prioritize. And then not only do I have to prioritize, but I have to sequence.
And it's so hard to do when everything is flying at you. I wrote this piece for Harvard Business Review called How to Work for a Boss Who Always Changes Their Mind, which is something I hear all the time. And I had so many leaders come back to me and say, oh no, I am that boss. The story you wrote about of the boss who saw a TikTok of something, and the boss who saw an ad for something else, and the boss who went to a conference and heard this new idea and was so happy about it all and dumped it all on their team and disrupted everything. I'm that person, and I didn't mean to be. And seeing the response to that piece from the leader's perspective gave me great empathy, because so often your boss is not overwhelming you, giving you all these priorities, saying nothing can fall through the cracks because they suck and they're a bad person and they hate you. It's because they have a lot to do too. And their boss is likely doing the same thing to them. That doesn't mean you have to take it on the chin, but the ability to, whether you are your own leader or whether you are working for someone, say, okay, here's our landscape here. Let's pick and choose. We got to, because if not, the important thing is going to fall through the cracks on accident.
Yeah. Ultimately, sometimes it just comes down to, okay, which thing are we working on first? It doesn't even really matter, because all of it's getting done at the same time anyway. It's really just a matter of in the moment for today or this week. And then when you scale back out to a month and look at that, it's like, oh, well, it really did all get done at the same time anyway. It's just really more for my immediate, like, do I do this or this or this first real quick? And it's not as heavy a decision overall. So, by the way, spoiler alert, Melody Wilding will be on the show in a few weeks to talk about managing up. So we will be we will be diving into this topic a little bit more. Obviously, there's a lot more that we haven't even touched on from your book, as well as a much more deeper dive into all the stuff we did talk about. I would love to point people to where they can grab Leading Yourself, as well as find out more / follow all your work.
My book, Leading Yourself, is everywhere books are sold. Audible, Kindle, Amazon, Target, Barnes & Noble, wherever you buy your books, there I am. You can also follow me on LinkedIn at Elizabeth Lotardo or visit my website, elizabethlotardo.com. I will say, if you are not a reader of books, this is a fractal, much like most good business books these days, where you can thumb around, and I have a video summary of it. So if you order the book, send me an email, I'll send you the video summary on me.
That's perfect. So I'll link up to all the things you just mentioned in the show notes for this episode. And Elizabeth, great talking with you, and open invitation. Come on back as you continue to dive in and dig through all of this work stuff. Got always an open invitation to come back to the show.
Awesome. I so appreciate being with you. Your audience is one that is inspiring. I mean, people who in this period of time want their work experience and the work experience of those around them to be better, to be more productive, to be more meaningful. I love this community.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, that's another podcast crossed off your listening to-do list. I hope that you got something out of this conversation with Elizabeth Lotardo like I did. This is a great book that partners with a number of the other conversations we've had recently. And I hope that you found some ideas to create some more joy at your workplace, or find those small moments of impact that can help you have a better sense of purpose where you're at. And again, we've got other conversations all about finding other things. If that current job still isn't for you, make sure to check those out in the feed. And if you found this episode helpful, do me the favor of sharing it. Share it on social media to your friends and family and followers, or send it on over to one person you know needs to hear it, and help it make the impact on them that it did on you. Thanks again for sharing. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next episode.